Parasites on the Great Spirit. Consciousness emerged early in the universe. If self-awareness defines being alive, then the fires of life ignited when the Big Bang's inferno cooled to where space became transparent. The four forces of nature split apart after the universe began, but even now they work together. Just like any instrumental quartet, each force is only one melody that needs the accompaniment of the other three to complete the harmonious masterpieces of space-time and matter. Gravity was the first to separate, ubiquitous, sheer as a dream, filling the continuum as thoughts fill a philosopher's head. The weak and strong forces soon followed, locked in their own pressure cooker whirls, with no time to rest, no room for error, lest instant annihilation. Where these forces get their energies from is impossible to say. The strong force must channel something from somewhere to maintain its infinite grip on atomic nuclei, but the details of that baffling vitality remain unrevealed. Electromagnetism is different. It can exist in so many places, provided it retains a connection to a constant source. It can travel great distances, contingent on the strength of its wellspring, but is forever in need of sustenance. Yet there is more to electromagnetism, and though unknown to most, it is not only a force of nature, but also that which is called sentient life. Untold, quasi-biological entities, more at home on an energy-generating planet than in the void of deep space. Electron-based creatures have always existed on Earth, but they were never constructed of pure negative electricity. It would have been impossible to derive living awareness from such frenetic, explosive power. Instead, the delicate, coordinated interactions of ions begin the odyssey through transformation. These wondrous, bodiless organisms emerge through the simplest atomic synergies. First, thin wisps of ions organize movements, and then elementary thoughts and ideas coalesced, very much in the same evolutionary manner as the carbon-based life that soon followed. Life barely survived in the early days, primarily because obtaining aliment relied on grazing in a barren environment. Rocks and minerals offered little fuel, so ionic life forms stayed primitive. Then came tangible life, and things changed for the ionics, the incorporeals. Corporeal organisms had density, and density meant lots of atoms, and atoms meant ionic nourishment, just what the incorporeals needed. These ghostly entities learned to use the thick somatics for food. At the outset, the prokaryotes gave up some nutrition, better than in the past, but still meager, as cell walls stood as formidable defenses. That single obstacle encasing almost every bacterium dependably repelled most offenses, and incorporeal development crept forward slowly. The emergence of wall-less animal cells changed everything for ionic beings. Eukaryotic progression inadvertently produced membrane-only cells that allowed for unlimited incorporeal feasting on the charged, unprotected cytoplasm. From that moment on, animal and ionic organisms evolved in tandem. It shouldn't surprise anyone that animism became a belief. Living bodies, no matter what the species, can appear possessed when the incorporeals invade to feed. Sometimes the raiders take a little and leave, but that isn't a set-in-stone pattern. Based on the amount of consumption, incorporeal feedings could be mistaken for anything from mild colds to cancers and even untreatable mental diseases. Behavioral disorders often manifest, starting substance abuses. Occasionally, these intrusive creatures do not know when to quit and kill their hosts. Ionics can cause such imbalances that the victims may develop fatal maladies. Modern societies lost contact with the primitives, along with their animism and shamanism, but such practices are still in use by the few who observe. The cosmopolitan sophisticates, who in the light of day deny ghosts and demons, whistle a different tune in the lonely midnight hours. Still, there are the staunch skeptics, those who ingest their useless antibiotics and anxiety pills, in contrast to the believers, who claim possession by demons. How you want to see things is your choice. This parasitic relationship has existed for hundreds of millions of years, and despite the suffering it causes humans, it really isn't so bad. Incorporeals are flourishing, and most humans are following suit, but not all. The Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota had an advocate in Jerry Hayoka. He served his tribespeople as a practicing psychiatrist and a parish priest. The members of the reservation, or res, thought with a lot of the finger-pointing determinism indoctrinated by Jesuit teachings. That was one creed Jerry didn't blindly accept. Maybe because of that demoralizing blame-mongering, hopelessness rained down and soaked into Lakota bones until foul water replaced marrow. As with so many other First Americans, Lakota tribal members weave themselves into the tapestry of their culture as if they were the threads. When that animated fabric impossibly ripped, the gossamer filaments hung limp. Alcoholism affected every facet of life on the res, despite being illegal, and in only 2 centuries, the vulture of death devoured most of this nation. Father Jerry's own parents, from what he can recall, fell victim to the profound decline years before. They both died when Jerry was still in elementary school, and that left him an orphan. Aunts and uncles and a few cousins didn't help, and the loner never felt a bond with any of them. Frustration pushed the tall, thin future priest hard, so hard that he never drank a drop. That sole act made Jerry different, but far more than willpower propelled him, and his Jesuit teachers noticed. Even their unintentional epikarakasi yielded to genuine admiration, encouragement, and hope for the Kaskalaka. Jerry possessed an intellectual intuitiveness, along with an emotional serenity that set him apart from the ordinary. This last survivor with the Hayoka surname buzzed through schoolwork and textbooks as if he were a chainsaw cutting through dead tree branches. But that only shaved the surface. This young man could see paths through problems that others could not, and peer into people's eyes to glimpse their souls. Jerry's rising reputation spread across the parish like a summer brush fire. So much at home in a modern world and 21st century science, but with a mind and spirit that would have placed him among the wisest of his ancestors. Many tribal members smiled at the mention of Jerry's name. They knew the Thunderbird had returned. This young man, truly the Lakota equivalent of the Phoenix, rose from the old tribe's ashes and would now usher in a glorious renaissance. This descendant of Crazy Horse felt proud of his budding stature in the community, but the modesty and level-headedness of a true warrior bound that self-esteem. Egotism never intruded. From early on, Jerry gravitated toward the Jesuits and felt a sense of belonging among the order. They welcomed him and guided him, never losing sight of his culture-bridging gifts. As soon as Jerry received his valedictorian diploma from the Red Cloud School, the diocese confidently packed him up and sent him to Harvard University without delay. Harvard remained a place and a fantasy that Jerry still had a hard time comprehending many years later. During his enrollment, it seemed like a thinker's paradise, where ideas and theories swung like battle axes, theoretically slaying the inequity monster and the beast of injustice. At that time, no problem remained unconquerable. Jerry concentrated on chemistry and psychology, and upon receiving his undergraduate degree, immediately enrolled in a medical school. This remarkable young man never forgot his heritage or his home. Jerry resolved to return to the res and do everything he could to improve the lives of his people. The Crimson resident took a different approach, and rather than becoming a surgeon, obstetrician, or any other hands-on physician, he chose psychiatry. This someday council elder wanted to change the way the tribe thought about itself, and maybe that would start a long, slow rebirth. First, he had to find out what made his people tick, and who but a board-certified Oglala shrink would have the best chance of success. Jerry did his internship and residency in the Dakotas, working long, exasperating hours in the psychiatric wards of the hospitals scattered throughout the windswept prairie. Through it all, he never abandoned his tribal roots or his Catholic faith. Something came over Jerry during that time, and the psychiatric explanation would have been a reaction to stress or the isolation. But it went deeper, a calling that touched his soul. Whatever the diagnosis, Jerry entered the seminary right after residency, and a few years later he emerged as an ordained priest. He never stopped his medical rounds, but his rotating shifts allowed him the flexibility to do both. And then he returned to the land of his childhood. Things were no different from the day Jerry left. Abject poverty, chemical abuse, and the woes that came with both. The young physician doubted himself. How could one man defend against the brain-draining plague that conquered his nation? The betting odds said that Jerry would end up dead, less than a footnote to the history of this once great Oglala Lakota Ayote culture. But some light glinted in the murk, and in fact it stood out like a glimmer of inspiration. The diocese promoted Father Crow Eagle to Monsignor Crow Eagle, meaning that the members of the res carried some influence. This cleric durably held up as one of the few people Jerry could relate to and talk to. The Monsignor preferred the name Crow Eagle. These two spiritual men spent many a night discussing indigenous history, the present mess, and the uncertain future. Spoken to, but in hushed tones, were the tribe's old beliefs and what is still called Wakantanka, the name of the Lakota religion and its supreme god. Thoughts of souls and ghosts that embody all living things and the non-living needed consideration. It was the path the Lakota walked. From the days the conquistadors first entered the Western continent, many followers of Christ remarked that Catholicism mirrored the beliefs of the Aboriginal cultures in the most fundamental ways. The Roman Catholic Church remains a fixture within the Native American community because of this. Take, for example, Catholic exorcism. What a scary thought that a modern, socially inclusive order still believes in demonic possession and all that goes along with it. It's barbaric, especially for a denomination that prides itself on intellectualism, yet here it stands. Is the ritual an obsolete vestige, not yet discarded, or is it something else? Can it be that the priesthood knows something that they do not want the rest of the world to know? Can satanic possession exist? Both the Catholics and the Wakantanka seem to think so, and a highly educated, weathered and scarred psychiatrist saw the old ideas anew. Jerry had his suspicions long before he climbed the intellectual ladder. During his elementary school years, he knew the old Oglala stories had to have some truth to them. More importantly, why did the spirits abandon his people? Did the tribe lose favor? Had a change really occurred? Did a nefarious presence arrive, something the natives could not cope with? Jerry's science-trained mind questioned his thinking. Should a psychiatrist accept spirits and ghosts? Is there a mystical answer to these problems? Or should he stick with Western medicine? After agonizing about it, Jerry decided that maybe both worlds could meld into one, and the time came to talk to Crow Eagle. Jerry assembled an impromptu meeting at the rectory of Holy Rosary Church. He asked several confidants to join him on an agreed-upon evening. They all showed up, despite the short notice. Summer neared its end in the Black Hills, and that usually meant unpredictable temperature swings. One day the heat could melt copper, but the next might be finger-numbing cold. The nights always stayed cool in these regions, and the sights of the bird migrations made it feel as though the guests were leaving the party. A little relief and a little sadness. Soon, the deafening caws and honking would give way to primeval silence. Just before that, a thin film of ice would form on the ponds and lakes. The rectory stood as a modest brick building behind the church. Crow Eagle lived there along with the other parish priests. That evening, 6 people gathered in the rustic living room, including Jerry and a Monsignor. A tongue-and-groove spruce ceiling spread above them, and the floor looked the same. On the white plaster walls hung elk antlers, bear skulls, stretch hides, and colorful Lakota artwork. A frequently used granite fireplace dominated the room, but only ruby embers spit and crackled that night. Coffee brewed in a pot, and each sat comfortably around a low oak table. The 60-ish Crow Eagle snugly filled one of the leather easy chairs with his ample bulk. Short and fat, he personified the image of a lifetime of fried foods and sweets. In every way, the Monsignor looked like the human equivalent of a bulldog. Heavy, bow-legged, jowly, and lacking a neck. And yet Crow Eagle's fetid body belied a nimble and vibrant mind. He deftly incorporated Oglala spiritualism with Roman Catholicism and understood the connection between the two. He brought logic, open-mindedness, and patience to the meeting. To his left sat sisters Dixie Red Willow and Maggie Ironcloud. They both held social worker licenses and served as teachers in the school district. Dixie looked in her late 20s, and despite no makeup or any adornments, this black-haired beauty could catch any man's attention. Dixie could say the same of Maggie, who appeared about 10 years older. Loose clothing couldn't hide their bony frames. The old man of the group, Father Derek Thunder, sat to the right of Crow Eagle. Father Thunder relished his reputation as a bumptious born radical. He'll probably continue his radicalism until his death. The good Father Thunder believed that Catholicism expressed itself as the European version of the Wakantanka religion of the Lakota. He often said, "Think of all the saints and their assorted jobs. Is it any different from Lakota theism? Wakantanka has certainly traveled the world since mankind's emergence, and it took the form of Jesus Christ for the whites and Buddha in the East. The Great Spirit Wakantanka has manifested itself to the various earthly peoples in many forms since time began." Father Thunder's heart and mind dwelled in a pre-European lodgepole teepee, and everybody knew it. His radicalism targeted his own people. The father thought that the answers to his nation's problems lay in its return to the old ways. He never wanted to rise above the rank of parish priest, and fear of his rabble-rousing kept the diocese from promoting him. Old Thunder passed well into his 8th decade, and has so far remained as spunky as a ferret. He fidgeted in his seat, waiting for the meeting to start. The wiry priest couldn't have mellowed if he tried. Whitehorse, Jerry's childhood friend, walked in and joined the coterie. In his younger days, Whitehorse showed a lot of the same promise that the psychiatrist did, but lacked the motivation, to put it kindly. Before puberty, this devoted friend started off as a juvenile delinquent, and it went down from there. High school dropout, heavy drinker, divorced, unemployed, and anything else to betray himself, but never his people. In the past, Whitehorse had the power to move mountains with his intellect, but that power never fully awoke. Still, when Jerry needed advice, guidance, or a sounding board, he could always rely on his lifelong coda for a clear point of view. And there they sat, 6 tribal members looking at the world through the eyes of their ancient ancestors, but making sense of it all with the empirical reasoning cultivated by Western education. Maybe the seemingly incompatible combination would cross the threshold to an answer. "Our tribe has been in decline for over 2 centuries, Crow Eagle stated. "You think the cause is evil spirits? We sent you to Harvard Medical School for that diagnosis?" Jerry grinned. "Look," he said, "there's an alarming amount of mental illness to go around, and I'm not saying that we're not experiencing it here on a reservation, but I see signs of something else going on. It's as if something has collectively poisoned the tribe over the centuries. Maybe it's something the white men brought over from Europe that we natives are allergic to or negatively influenced by." "We're negatively influenced by European occupation," spouted Father Thunder, "and this disease won't stop until we're in oblivion." "Maybe," Jerry replied, "but maybe the Europeans brought over some sort of spiritual disease that's killing us from the inside out." Eyebrows raised and eyes sharpened to focus. Sister Ironcloud reacted first. "I have been cognizant of something odd with our people, something missing or something amiss. And yes, it's not purely organic. I would say that the Great Spirit does not guide them. Not totally gone, but not totally there either. Sister Red Willow concurred. Yes, like something is driving our people, but they don't know the rules of the road, or something like that. Whitehorse sat quietly, his eyes as sharp as buffalo knives. All sounds and words gutted and devoured by those dark hooded slits, cosmic abysses that nothing got past. He placed his coffee mug on the table and sat back. The room muted. The clerics and sisters stared in anticipation because regardless of his low economic standing, every word from Whitehorse carried wealth beyond gold. Then he spoke. There has been something going on for a long time, the rugged outdoorsman elaborated, and it's insidious. I have a theory that's worth listening to, although I think Jerry is seeing it for himself. It's more than a theory for me, but I know it lacks hard evidence. My thinking is that when Europeans came to our lands, they brought over more than smallpox and gunpowder. Traditionally, all living things possess a spirit, which provides a connection to the other world and also brings out the best of the mind and body it inhabits. In other words, a soul lives in each of us. When we die, it may go back to the Great Spirit, who we call Wakantanka, immediately, or it may linger a while on Earth. Europeans have their own unique souls and diseases. Both infected our people. The diseases battered us, but the foreign essences infected our souls, and we've been, for lack of a better term, self-destructive ever since. Jerry nodded slightly as he stared at the perceptive Whitehorse. Then the observant priest looked at the other four. "What are your thoughts, Crow Eagle?" the young cleric asked. The Monsignor ruminated, as unmoving as a boulder. For a minute he sat with his hand under his chin. Then the middle-aged pastor said, "I think we all said the same thing. Does anybody in this room not believe Whitehorse's assessment?" Nobody disagreed. "What can anybody do about it?" asked Sister Ironclad. "I will help in any way I can." "To help is why we're here," Crow Eagle stated. "Father Thunder, tell us about your idea." "It's not my idea," the octogenarian yapped. He sounded like an irritated terrier. "I'll simply explain a hypothesis kicked around for longer than you can imagine, and yes, Whitehorse sees the truth. According to some medicine men, a powerful demon dwells in the Badlands. This evil spirit originally hitched a ride within a European settler. This spirit was weak, but once the settler died, it escaped to infect our people. The specter grew powerful and hungry for more souls. From its lair, it extends its psychic tentacles throughout our people. And if we ever want to break free of this monster, we'll have to go to its secluded fortress and kill it, if that's even possible." "So what's the deal?" asked Whitehorse. "The tribe needs a second chance, and so do I. Whatever's required, I'll do." For hours they dissected approaches and propositions. Whitehorse, Father Thunder, and Crow Eagle led the vocalizing, sometimes yelling at each other in frustration. Sister Ironclad mediated, pointing out the conflicting strategies' strengths and flaws. Like two barnyard owls, Sister Red Willow and Jerry silently observed. The psychiatrist absorbed everything said, trying to separate reason from the irrational. He mentally assessed the validity of the arguments. Red Willow stared robotically, without emotion. Jerry couldn't figure her out. He attributed her lack of emotion to youthful timidity. When the morning light reached their eyes, a coherent plan emerged. 4 of them would trek into the Badlands, armed with ancient ceremonial incantations, and try to exorcise and destroy the root demon, whom to this day the Oglala call Unktehila. They decided that Jerry, Whitehorse, and Sisters Ironclad and Red Willow would make the journey. Father Thunder accumulated too many years for the mission, and Crow Eagle's weight and diabetes prevented his physical involvement. Everyone knew the incantations as part of being spiritual leaders in 2 worlds. Whitehorse knew the sacred words as an obligation to his heritage. He might not have lived life to the fruition of his talents, but he would, nonetheless, live it as a culturally enriched Oglala. Now that we have our goal, Father Thunder disclosed, I'll give you more details. Legend says there's a burial ground hidden among the Badlands' countless hoodoos where Unktehila holds out. It's not an old graveyard, as our cemeteries go, only a few hundred years. It is, though, where this ultimate demon reigns. The old chiefs and medicine men hoped the fiend would stay put, but it didn't. It struck out from its nest through unknown ways and wreaked its snaky destruction. Well, you know the rest. We have kept this burial ground secret since that time. Crow Eagle knows its spot. Over the next few days, the force stocked up on the items they needed. No one knew how long the mission would take, but Pride, as seasoned survivalists, kept supplies light. Tents, sleeping bags, and a few days' worth of dried foods covered the list, and portable water filters, but no water. Their dignity did not permit that luxury. They would find the precious liquid throughout their trek. Ritual icons and ceremonial clothing topped the agenda. Then Crow Eagle drove the 4 exorcists north and eventually through an indistinct entrance into Badlands National Park. He continued deep into the inhospitable land. The 4-wheel drive truck rode like a brick, and the passengers' tailbones took a pounding along the bumpy dirt road, but at last they halted. Grainy hoodoos towered on all sides of the intrepid band. Less than 1 million years ago, this was the floor of an inland sea. Over the millennia, wind and water carved the soft sandstone into buttes and ziggurats, with each geological layer having a different tone. Crow Eagle stopped near the bank of a large creek that winded through the forbidding megaliths. Everyone got out and stretched. "You know," White Horse commented, "I thought I knew every square foot of the Badlands, but I never saw this place." "Me either," Jerry agreed. "I never even explored this part of the park. I didn't know there was an entrance over here." "There isn't," Crow Eagle answered. "At least not to the public. We're in a section where no one can go except chosen medicine men, and the tribe never made it common knowledge. It's a peculiar place. Just look at this stream. Unusual to have one out here, don't you think? It's fed by a deep underground aquifer." Tortured foxtail pines stood fitfully along the banks, visible for as far as the bending landscape allowed, and purple sage grew low to the ground. Other than those, dispersed wild grasses swayed as the only vegetation that struggled in the depleted soil. The trees themselves looked like demons. Crow Eagle walked over to a large patch of fall-colored switchgrass and pulled out 2 fiberglass canoes. "They're not bull boats, but they'll do," the Monsignor quipped. "I put these here yesterday. You'll travel in pairs, paddling until you get to the gravesite. When you get there, summon Unktehila with the sacred words. Once you do that, with the great prayer, beseech Wakantanka to destroy this bane. After that, use the satellite phone to contact me. If I don't hear from you, I'm not coming to get you. We'll figure that you became the ingredients for delicious monster wahampi." The mildly off-color joke eased tensions, and then Crow Eagle drove away while the team loaded their supplies into the canoes. In less than 20 minutes, they pushed the boats onto the slow-moving stream and paddled toward their destination. Ironcloud sat in the front of one canoe, while White Horse took the stern. The other watercraft had Red Willow in the bow as Jerry steered from behind. In a couple of hours, the sky changed to twilight, and they pulled ashore to sleep for the night. The campfire illuminated the twisted trees and hoodoos to cast weird and strange shadows. This was a supernatural place, a land of ghosts and phantoms that not even a Harvard-educated psychiatrist could rationalize. Dawn broke, and after a cold breakfast, they pushed onto the water. The chilly autumn morning refreshed the foursome more than they cared to admit, but no one complained. Migrating birds flew above in a cloudless sky. A steady breeze pushed against the boats, but not enough to slow their progress. Deformed trees leaned like agonized souls, silently watching the travelers pass, and the eroded stone pinnacles formed a maze that only the unthinking flow could solve. It was truly an uncanny place. They stopped to rest twice, eating sparingly and rehearsing the action for when they arrived at the sacred cemetery. Anxieties rose. Whitehorse grew strong, filled with a decidedness and direction that Jerry never saw in him. Maybe this crisis galvanized the once promising tribesman to become the person he always should have been. His companions silently hoped that this determination would subdue his evil spirit. The coming battle would tell. As her name alluded, Sister Ironcloud conducted herself with annealed poise, unemotional, fixed on the task, with a confidence in herself that people swayed toward. She moved with the confidence that comes from inner strength. Her partner, Sister Red Willow, continued her stoic silence, but showed no fear. Jerry knew of Whitehorse's idle brilliance since their childhood days, and Ironcloud seemed his productive equal. However, Jerry barely knew Dixie. Although she was a Oglala, she didn't grow up on a reservation. She said she originally came from the north, but early on, someone whisked her away to an out-of-state convent. That's how it's always been for Lakota. Just a few months ago, she showed up at Pine Ridge. For what it amounted to, both women seemed apt for the mission. In the late afternoon, as evening called, the demon chasers caught sight of grave markers. On the left, rings of arranged fist-sized stones encircled bare clay mounds. Some plots appeared modest, but others included intricate tribal ornaments. The cemetery had an irregular shape that contoured the jagged terrain, but it still carved out almost an acre of land. Old wooden shields and spears dangled off partially collapsed funeral platforms. They could see skulls, ribs, and hand bones on other elevated scaffolds. The sunset glowed red and bathed the hoodoos, gnarled evergreens, and sacred land in a palpable melancholy. All at once, Jerry felt the past greatness of his people and the emptiness of what lingered. The canoes touched the bank, and the team stepped onto land. "I feel sad," Jerry murmured, half to himself. "Sad for what we're doing?" Ironcloud asked. "Or depressed?" "A heavy depression." "I feel it too," Whitehorse said. "We feel it because we're close to the archdemon Unktehila. If we don't do what we must do now, we never will. The great devil will suck the willpower and life out of us." Each member threw on a dusty, long-unused shaman sarap. The men carried willowwood shields. The light faded, and no one wanted to get caught in a paranormal ogre fight in the pitch dark. They hurried to a clearing in a graveyard center and stood as a square, back to back, with each soul healer facing a different direction. "Come forth, Unktehila, come forth," Jerry boomed. "Hayo wo," Whitehorse shouted. "Hayo wo, Unktehila." The ground rumbled, as if irritated by a prodding spear. Scaffolding crumbled, and bare bones rattled down to the hard earth. Something had come to life in this place of the dead. Then the skeletons stood. Ironcloud and Red Willow raised the palms of their hands and chanted Lakota incantations. It enraged whatever dwelled below. More skeletons rose and walked forward, intent on tearing the living organs out of the trespassing shamans. Cracks in the dry soil formed, and fleshless hands emerged. Jerry and Whitehorse trained their attention on the immediate crisis and shouted potent mantras. It partially worked, and some of the skeletal abominations collapsed and turned to dust. The sisters did not pause, did not breathe, and continued their incessant chorus. The men used their shields to beat back any advancing horrors. Beneath their feet, the hallowed sandstone heaved as if breaking its binding chains. A clawed hand from a nightmare reached out and grabbed the granular dirt. The brute emerged, slowly, part human, part reptilian, the embodiment of evil. Horns sprouted from its forehead, and its red eyes pierced the hunters like arrows. Unktehila had surfaced. The group froze in a rhyme of disbelief. Straight away they faced their utmost enemy, the most destructive force on earth, and everything rested on their untapped grit. The sisters resumed chanting. Jerry and Whitehorse shouted the great prayer at the creature, but nothing could stop it or slow its march toward them. Spiked fangs gleamed in the thing's grotesque maw, and if it killed these desperate braves, the Lakota's last hope would die with them. Red Willow suddenly quieted, turned, and stared into the beast's hate-filled eyes. "Step aside," she roared. Her voice split the thin air, and her friends obeyed. Despite the dark, moonless night, Dixie became visible, as if she glowed from within. Seconds increased the intensity, and unmistakably she kindled an inner fire. Unktehila growled and moved forward, approaching Red Willow. The slender nun replied with her own menacing growl. The sister then took a wide stance and extended her arms toward the monster. Her hands clenched. "Ni fawa, we chata, ki kawa, Oglala, we choni," Red Willow screeched. The young ascetic's fist became sparking dynamos, unleashing arcs of intense electricity that blasted into the core of the all-powerful Unktehila. Then a flash and a body-flattening percussion. A light burst temporarily blinded Dixie's companions, and sonic waves rippled the nearby water. Moments later, the four stood up, alone. Jerry lit a lantern. Bones lay scattered, and Unktehila vanished. An odor of ozone permeated the air, and so did a sense of tranquility. Red Willow returned to normal, but appeared exhausted. Then she glanced at Whitehorse. "How's your outlook on life?" He gazed, puzzled. "Oddly, it's like I just won the lottery and got promoted to chief all at the same time," he replied. "Thought so. May we please have an explanation, young lady?" Ironclad sternly insisted, with a tinge of a smile. "Of course," the young nun replied. "I am an Oglala sister, but I am not a human being of common design. We are not alone on this planet, and beings as smart as people also call themselves Earthlings. Some think these things have been around since the beginning of time. In any event, we just dealt with a member of the Edimu, or more likely a colony. The Edimu are parasitic life forms that were first discovered by the Sumerians, thus named by them. Usually they are not very harmful because they are species-specific. In other words, racial and ethnic groups become tolerant of the endemic Edimu subtypes. Unfortunately, when Edimu switch ethnic groups for feedings, the new hosts often experience incompatibilities with them, sometimes with terrible consequences. That's what happened when European Edimu invaded Native American tribes. The foreign Edimu eradicated the indigenous Edimu, and that change brought us to the brink of physical, mental, and emotional death. The Vatican knew about the Edimu for over 1,000 years, Red Willow continued, because of the effects of worldwide migrations and colonizations. It took a while, but Vatican geneticists, inspired by Gregor Mendel, developed a small group of us who can generate electric fields that can kill the Edimu, same as electric eels. This was one minor battle in a war that may have no end. "That doesn't explain the appearance of Unktehila," Jerry stated. "What of Unktehila?" Red Willow looked at Jerry, and her mouth formed a coy smile. "The Pine Ridge Oglala are now liberated," she replied. "Time to move on."